Hello and welcome to the last session of the five pillars. This is part 4 of 4, and we're going to cover comprehension and fluency today. I'm recording this first part of it a little differently than the last part of it because I forgot to start recording my session. So I'm going to do the first little bit here, and then you'll see it's going to jump over to the live session a little later in the presentation. So what we're going to cover today is the simple view of reading, the five pillars of reading review, comprehension, what it is and why we do it, comprehension instruction, and then of course we're going to end with fluency. So comprehension can be made up between background knowledge or a language, vocabulary, text structures, and we're going to cover all those kind of things. And through fluency, more about the indicators and modeling and strategies and technology that you can use for that. So the simple view of reading is a review of what we've been doing from the last pillars, but just a reminder that decoding is that first part there, that first column with print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, morphology, orthographic mapping, and then of course language comprehension, which is what we're covering today, background and topical knowledge, vocabulary, text features, inferencing, and you can see fluency is that link that ties it all together, which is why we're putting it together with comprehension and not doing it its own session, is just because fluency is that last little bit of tying everything together of all those decoding skills and the language comprehension to get that really skilled reader that we're looking for in our elementary classroom. So what were those five pillars again? Right here: phonemic awareness, phonics instruction, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. This is linked out on the slide deck if you want to go to our SharePoint, and you can see all of these broken down into their parts and more information depending on what you are looking for. But today is comprehension. We all know what comprehension is. We all probably do it in our classrooms. We all know comprehension strategies and things that we're doing. So that's wonderful. It is a necessary pillar in our reading and teaching reading to our students. So we want them to understand and remember what they're reading. We want them to develop that in predicting, inferring skills and making connections and analyzing what's being read. And before they become independent readers, they can begin practicing and develop comprehension skills when books are read aloud. So it can be side by side when we're doing the phonemic awareness and phonological awareness and phonics in the earlier years. You can also have comprehension side by side with that. It's always a good strategy to have students think about what they are reading at any level and at any stage. However, as we know, comprehension can be difficult. This is a study out of the United States, so it doesn't necessarily fit our division, but it just shows that it is critical. So when you can see the statistics there of fourth graders and eighth graders and their reading comprehension levels, and then what that could mean in the future for graduating high school and things like that, you can see that it is a very strong indicator of the future and what the enjoyment of reading and all of that kind of thing that goes with being a good reader. So comprehension is extremely important, and these statistics show, it can be also very difficult. So what does good comprehension instruction entail? Well, these are kind of the important things. If we are intentional about our planning and teaching, we include these elements of comprehension: background knowledge, oral language, vocabulary instruction, text structures, comprehension strategies, other ones, and writing, of course, as a support for that comprehension. So the first one we'll talk about here is background knowledge. So it's background knowledge is all the stuff that's already inside our head, like places we've been, things we've done, books we've read, all the experiences that we've made that make up who we are and what we know. So solid research tells us that how well a child reads is strengthened by the prior knowledge that he or she has about the world. When something in a book reminds a student of an experience or an event in their own life, reading becomes an active process. This helps the student make meaning from what they are reading. For example, children may be playing on a basketball on a basketball team, or spends a Sunday afternoon in August watching a baseball game with grandpa. Now, these are students that then are going to be attracted to more of those sports books, though, so they have a connection already with something that's in the sports. So that's just showing you that a real life experience or can really do a major asset for connecting to a book. There are ways to do this, and you can see there's a link here to the anticipation guide on reading rockets. It's a great way to start the thinking of what's before reading. So students will listen to, several statements about key concepts presented in the text, and they're often structured as a series of statements with which the student can choose to agree or disagree. So you can see that there's already that it starts that thinking process that we want before we even start reading. So anticipation guide is a fantastic one that we could use as a strategy. There's of course this KWL chart that we know. So what we know, what we want to know, and then of course if you continue on with it, you want to do what I've learned from this book too. But asking questions is good. What do you know about, or who's ever done this? Provide sensory materials for students to look at. So this is another good way to introduce something, maybe even showing a video of something before you read a book along the same lines. So pictures, again, picture books also do the same kind of thing. So all of these things we can do to start stimulating that background knowledge. A good case or a good scenario of this is sometimes we have students that come to us from overseas. Their English level is very good, and maybe even their reading is very good, which means their decoding is excellent. But if they don't have the experience that the culture or what we would have here, then they're lacking that background knowledge. For example, if you're reading a story about plowing a field and this student has come from a different country and they don't know that what a plow is or what it does, because it's not really a word that we use a lot these days. That background knowledge is lacking, and then all of a sudden the comprehension is lacking, even if that student has very good decoding skills. And more, what we could do is this connect, extend, challenge. So you can again introduce a new idea or video or an article, and this will activate their connections and prior knowledge and will help them access and retain new information that is being presented. This routine will help students articulate their thinking, which in turn helps them improve comprehension and reinforces the outcomes or learning criteria. This thinking routine connects directly to our outcomes that we have, our current language arts outcomes. It helps students consider that new information in the context of what they already know, helps them move their thinking forward, and then questions provide insight into the ideas that they are wrestling with. Very similar to KW chart, but I think a little bit more intentional and direct to our outcomes. Next is oral language, another really key piece in comprehension, providing that extra layer of comprehension. So the power of talk. How do we do it, and when do we provide time for your students to talk? Well, providing as many opportunities for students to communicate orally during a lesson is essential to comprehension and retention of this information. They can be think, pair, share, talk and turn, even you as a teacher sliding in beside. Like with everything, with everything in life, practice is the key to improvement. So the more opportunity we give them to practice this, the better it is. Oral language is that foundation of literacy, and of course, it not only provides the practice for speaking, but also with listening. So those are two really essential components into the whole comprehensive literacy. So providing this opportunity for students to have this is really an essential element of comprehension and literacy. So with intentional oral communication in a classroom, students get to practice accepting others' opinions. They solidify their own thinking. They build understanding. They can problem solve. Social interaction is key. Accountability to learning. And of course, it improves their verbal and listening communication. So when can you do this? Well, whole group. You can do it small group, or you can even do it independently. All of it will be okay, but it's more about being intentional and building this into your lessons. And one last thing, after independent work, we say the game changer there, and this is the reason is because sometimes when we do independent work for some of our students, they just do their work and put it away, and there's no real accountability to it. But if we have them speak about what they've learned after that independent work, That's why we call it a game changer, because it does add that layer of accountability and everything else that we're talking about here with the oral language. It adds that one more element, which is a major part of it than just having done their work and then moving on to the next thing. We're probably all very familiar with cooperative learning strategies. These are excellent to use, especially for comprehension and that oral language piece. By using these cooperative learning strategies, research has shown that it has greatly improves team building, social skills, communication skills, knowledge building, decision making, processing information, and thinking skills. So lots of stuff, lots of great learning that can go on with these cooperative learning strategies. It's linked out here, so you can see if any of those you would like to try, or some of them you might be already using, but if you would like to see if there's any more that you could possibly add to your classroom. Next is vocabulary. There was a session that was done earlier on vocabulary as a pillar in itself, but of course, vocabulary is connected to comprehension. There are the three tiers of vocabulary. You can see there the tier one words that are, these are the basic everyday vocabulary words. A lot of these words that our ELL learners still have to learn, and some of our other learners, maybe there's some basic words that they're still learning as well. Things like children, chair, walk, happy. Then the tier two words are those academic vocabulary words that we use a lot for our assessments, and saying, can you describe or explain, or can you analyze? What we have to do a better job at sometimes is explaining what we mean by this. So if we want a student to describe something, we have to let them know, and especially all those ELL learners or other students that maybe don't know what describe means, you have to put your expectations next to that describe. So when I say describe, I want you to use it, these words, or this is what I'm meaning by that. Or if you want to explain, this means that I want you to show your thinking on this. So once we can make sure that we are explicitly teaching these tier two words, it really goes a long way in clarifying our expectations. And then of course there's the tier three words that go to content specific. So in our social or our science and things like that, sometimes there are words that are very specific that we need to teach as well. And these are vocabulary words that you really need to learn, or they need to learn in order for them to comprehend what it is that we are teaching. So like I was saying, these are the tier one vocabulary words that our ELL and other students may benefit from. Putting labels around the classroom and things like that is a great way to teach those tier one, but they are the ones that are probably come up most and are most obvious, but sometimes for our ELL, we have to give them a little more support. The tier two, like I was saying, they are those academic words. These are linked out here too for tier two lists on all the grades. So please click on that one and see if there's something there that you can use. But it is important to be intentional with explicitly teaching these tier two words. And of course, our tier three vocabulary instruction is that content specific. And again, this is linked out for you to Reading Rockets for some ideas on how you can intentionally teach these tier three words before, during, and after reading. And this is the part of the live presentation that I jumped into and I started recording. So you are going to see it's going to jump into the live session, and enjoy the rest of the session. Keep on going. So this here is the concept circle. This is an idea too of vocabulary building. So you can see here that if you give students 3 words from a particular area of study, again, this is the content words from our science or our social or health, students can then add a 4th related word. It's kind of a fun puzzle way to do it. They can articulate their understanding and their connection. But for younger grades, you might even want to possibly do 3 pieces of that puzzle instead of 4 if 4 is too much. So you can also think about that if you wanted to adapt that to a younger classroom. That's not a problem too. But the concept circle is a great way to add and have that connection of the words and tying in those dots of our vocabulary list that we are teaching. And then next, we're going to talk a little bit about these text structures. So text structures are important in our learning as well. It refers to how information within
within a written text is organized. So text structures are a way that they can recognize, or recognizing the underlying structures of a text can help students focus attention or key concepts and relationships. They can anticipate what is to come and monitor their comprehension as they read. So text structure can be introduced as early in every lesson, and as reading material are initially previewed and throughout the lesson at every turn. So it's something that you can do early, and then as you're going through the lesson, you can see how this is all set up and organized. And it's really essential for that comprehension to see that there's intentionality in the author and the way they write. So this really promotes the student to connect to their memory structures and comprehend using these logical connections presented by the text structure. Upper elementary grade students can learn by the comparison or problem or solution or cause and effect. But research has shown that you can also teach students as early as grade 2 of these same things. And you'd begin with something like comparison text, and then you might get to the problem solution or the cause and effect after that. And it's okay to use more than one text structure at a time, as long as they're explicitly taught and as long as you are really pulling those out so students know that structure and can see it through your lens, because they won't see it specifically, but if you can be really showing them by pulling it out and saying, like, this is why this is all set up this way, it really goes a long way in their understanding as well. And text structures can be used for all genres of text. Expository texts are all about the cause and effects and problems and solutions, and comparisons with sequencing and descriptions are nested within that. And it's especially helpful for content in other areas like social and or science, things like that. So why would we need this? Well, it helps students identify common text structures, of course, in both fiction and nonfiction. It improves that comprehension of students by organizing information and supports their working memory and retention of information. There's two sites here that are linked out for you with a whole bunch of graphic organizers that you can look through and possibly use in your own classroom that will help you pull out these text structures in your classroom with your students. Then next, let's get to the comprehension strategies, which probably is what we're most used to and we're probably fairly good at, but it's always good a reminder of best practices out there. So you've probably seen this before too, this literacy continuum and this wheel. This is fantastic for creating and planning your lessons and really solidifying what you want to do. So you can see those systems of strategic actions are all there. And this helps with thinking, of course, within the text and beyond the text and about the text. And there's specific strategies within that you can really focus on. And each one of these could be a possible mini lesson at the beginning of the week. And you really focus on these throughout the week and you weave it into your guided reading and your small group instruction and really solidify some of these skills. I mean, some of the easiest ones that we usually start with is something like making connections. That's a really easy one for students because everyone has experience. So if they can relate or they can make a connection to what they're learning, that of course is a great thing. Some of them do get a little bit more difficult as we go along, but these are all a great place for you to start. And this discussion prompt is very good too, because it provides questions for you and your students to start the way you're thinking. So whether it's within or beyond or about, it's stuff about like, what's the problem of the story, or why do you think this way, or why did the author choose to do this? So there's certain question prompts that you can use there, and that's linked for you as well. Now, the importance of asking questions. Of course, we know this is essential, but there's also levels of questions that we can ask. So you can see those on that wheel on the side there too. There's and the higher order level thinking questions, we know about these as well, but it's really important to ask that variety of questions. Explicit instructions with their answering questions and incorporating wait time, we all know that too. If you ask a question and you just give an answer, or you let the first student answer the question, it really doesn't help the rest of the group. So that wait time is really important, especially if it's a question that needs some thinking. Then ask the question, make sure that they're raising their hand, wait for it, let lots of hands go up so that they all have lots of answers. And then that way, that stimulates that thinking in all of our students, because if you just give them an easy out, or you just always call on that first student that puts up their hand, of course, we're missing out on a lot of learning there, or a lot of thinking processes with the rest of our students. And of course, answering is just as important as asking those questions. So providing the feedback and prompting and the validation of the questions are all really important too. And you can see those level ones are just kind of that simple recall. The level 2 is more of like a skill or a concept based question. And then the level 3 is more of that strategic thinking and a little bit more. And then of course, the level 4 is that extending that knowledge now, is applying that new knowledge and thinking outside of what we're talking about. So you can see those level of questions there, and it's important again to ask a variety of those. Lots of comprehension ideas. Again, this is linked out for you. It brings a lot of comprehension ideas into your lesson. You can see there's lots here before and during and after reading. All of these, again, if it's linked out onto this site, and all of these things, if you click on them, they are comprehension ideas that you can possibly work for or use in your class as well. So that's linked out for you. And one example of that is these exit slips. We're probably familiar with this, but this is excellent way to see comprehension happening. So exit slips can be written, they can be oral, they can even be digital if you wanted to, and the responses to these questions that you ask at the end of a lesson, they're meant to be really quick. They're not meant to be really long, convoluted questions, but just, are they thinking? Are they getting what I'm doing? So they're informal. You're not assessing any of this, that kind of thing, but enables teachers to quickly know where their students are at. So some examples, again, what's one thing that you've learned today, or tell me one thing that has a diagram in it, or what is one connection you've made to the book. So exit slips are one of these. Oops, right here. In here, you can see there's exit slips there, but obviously there's lots more that you can possibly use. Reciprocal teaching is a concept, and this book is linked out here. It's a wonderful way that you can use, again, before, during, and after your lessons. You can see that there's some strategies here for starters. There's the prediction, there's the questioning, which we kind of talked about a little bit. There's the clarifying, and there's the summary. These are all really good strategies that you can do to get these comprehension skills and thinking about all of this stuff. So again, you want to have that comprehension happening throughout the lesson, like I was just saying, before and during and after, and you want to have elements of it so that that's the full lesson. So a scaffolded discussion and technique that incorporates these 4 main strategies is great. So it fits with any grade level lesson using fiction or nonfiction text. And then you also want to be grouping them in dynamic kind of groups. You don't just want, oops, sorry, too far. You don't want them always being in the same group. So if you're kind of mixing up those groups, we probably, some of us may have been out to your schools and talking about how you can get these small group instructions and how you can kind of diversify them a little bit more than what we're used to of just leveled readings together. So the better and the more dynamic, if they're working on a different skill or different area or things like that, but mixing those up and having them heterogeneous, as you see there, is a great way to go. And this helps those struggling readers. And then you can also put them as an expert in a certain area. So if, again, going back to I can't go back quite, but going back to the predicting or the questioning or the clarifying or summary. So if you give one of those struggling readers an area, they dive into it, they really do well at it, and it gives them that little bit of confidence being an expert in a certain area, and that really helps, right? Again, you want it to be easy to read, high interest books to start so that they learn this technique and they learn how to be a predictor or a questioner or a clarifier or a summarizer. And you want to model that and work right through it before you can get to that independent stage. It's that's what we want eventually, but you have to really scaffold that before that all happens. And so you again, we would say meeting at least twice a week would be good to keep the discussion going. But of course, even if you can handle more than that, that would even be better. But the more the better, obviously, in terms of learning all of this. And then the next part, we will talk about is writing to support comprehension. So I know that this is the pillars of reading, but as we know, reading and writing are very intertwined and they go hand in hand all the time. So there are two functions of writing in the classroom. One is this learning to write, and one is writing to learn. Obviously, learning to write, we would handle that in our ELA class, and we are very explicit in our writing instruction. So we are assessing how they're writing and what the writing looks like. And then, of course, there's the writing to learn, which is more about the comprehension part of it. So it's more of a way of thinking. So think of writing as a way of thinking instead of actually we're assessing their writing. So with writing to learn, we are not assessing this writing because it's a way of that the students can show us their thinking. But it is important to provide opportunities for both, but especially for the comprehension that we're talking about is more about that writing to learn. So writing, like I was just saying, is a form of thinking. Through writing, students can make those connections and think critically and construct meaning. And this writing can occur at various points, again, beginning during and after, so that they can activate and they can acquire and they can apply these lessons. So you want to think about your content areas and how you can leverage this for writing. This does need to be grounded in meaningful content. So we did a book study a little earlier called The Knowledge Gap, and this is kind of what it was all about, is the more meaningful content you can have in your classroom, the more meaningful the learning will be. And even with narrative writing, to discussing the themes, and again, you can go back to those graphic organizers and do some writing to learn there too, and using those organizers to stimulate some of this writing. And how would we do this? Well, there's lots of different ways, but a few examples would be that free writing, journal writing, reader response. These are all excellent ways. Using this structure regularly as a form of thinking, so making observations and experiment or answering questions, reflecting, all of these kinds of things are great. And the more you use them, the better the students are going to get. And it creates a form of thinking now that's an outlet for them if you can make it a habit into your classroom. And offer prompts as necessary or appropriate. So, the sentence starters of I learned or I understand or I observed, these kind of things will help some of these struggling writers out there that will sit with a blank page. So having these prompts maybe will stimulate some of this thinking. And again, it's not for assessment. It's just, we don't want to assess this writing, but we do want them to be writing and practicing. And then it's also going to contribute to their comprehension because of these thinking on the page skills that we are stimulating. And then finally, we are going to talk about a little bit of fluency. So that was quite a lot to unpack in comprehension, but I know I went pretty fast and furious. So if you are having any questions out there, you can, I see there's the chat going a little bit in there, and I'm sure my friends are helping it out. But if you are having some questions out there, you can contact us and think about what's for comprehension before I get on to the fluency. I just wanted to tie that up and say that that's kind of that comprehension piece of it. But like I said, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us and let us know if you have any concerns or questions or things, successes. We love to hear about the successes of what works for you too. But the next part, and like I was saying, fluency is kind of that bow that ties it all in a knot. And if you think about even learning languages, when you say, oh, can you speak French? Well, not fluently. Usually that almost coincides with the mastery of it. So if we think about fluency, it's when students are really good decoders and they're really good at that comprehension. And now that fluency starts to go because that automaticity is there. And then you can see that fluency starts to happen. However, that being said, we can be having some practice at this as early as grade 1, grade 2 even. There's still fluency practices that we can do. Obviously, they're not going to be at that mastery level in grade 1 or 2, but there are certain strategies that we can help fluency along the way as we're learning all these other pillars. So what is it? It's the ability to read text accurately, quickly, and expressively. What it means is fluency is the ability to read as one speaks and to make sense of what is being read. So it's one thing to be reading really well and articulate, but if you don't actually know what it means, then there's a bit of a disconnect there. So we have to make sure that we are pausing and decoding these words when we are encountering these difficult words. And developing fluency is critical to a student's motivation to read. Like I was saying before, if students can access the text and they know what's happening in the text, it brings about that joy of reading, because you can really dive into a book. And all of us out there as adults, I'm sure that there are books that you have read and you still remember, and you probably go back to, that you absolutely just love because it takes you to a time and a place that is wonderful. And that's what we want to give to our students. We want them to be able to experience that as well, especially in this digital age. Diving into a book and using your imagination is an amazing experience that I find that's getting a lost art, or at least I hope it's not getting a lost art, but it sure seems that way. So having this love of reading is important, and fluency is what makes that happen, because they can access the text and they can understand it at the same time. And that's that mastery level of reading. So again, there's some indicators that we have that show how well students are doing. So again, there's the accuracy part of it, which is the ability to decode using those principles of phonics. The better the students are at the skill equals better fluency, of course. And then, of course, the pacing is that the rate of the student reads. So appropriate pacing results from accuracy and comprehension again, and knowing our stops and our pauses and things like that. And then the prosody is that expressive reading. They include that appropriate emotion when you need to, or again, for pausing for punctuation or emphasizing certain words or automatopoeia and things like that, and having that expression in our language. Sometimes we confuse prosody with fluency, but prosody is a part of fluency, if that makes more sense. So prosody is that expressive reading that we sometimes think that's what fluency means, but fluency also has that accuracy and pacing attached to it as well. So the importance of modeling this: you are the best reader in that classroom, most likely, hopefully. You probably have some pretty star-studded students in your classroom too, but hopefully you're still the better reader out there. So when you're reading aloud to your students, you have that opportunity to model this accurate reading, this oral expression and pacing, which is fluency. So as you read, make sure that you are also being very strategic in what you're showing them. So you're changing your volume, you're emphasizing particular words, you're pointing out how you attend to punctuation. If there's an exclamation or a question, how our intonation goes up or speeds up. And then you project a particular emotion on a character as your voice, if you're reading sad or happy or fast or slower, or pretending you're a monster or a robot. So some of the good readers out there that I've heard, they can change their voice with each character, which is a great way. I love listening to it. So that means it's fantastic. And that's why we can even get our students to kind of practice these kind of things, and then they get better at it. So again, if you're modeling all this in your classroom, students are going to mimic this in their own reading. So it is important for you to be modeling and be in front of that. So again, providing these shared reading opportunities is an excellent way to increase this fluency. And so thinking about incorporating it into your morning message, or reading of big books and poetry, showing text on a document camera or smartboard to provide sharing reading experiences to your students, and modeling that things that we were just talking about with what good readers actually do. And then there's a couple of classroom strategies here. These are linked out for you again. So these are some things that we could possibly work on for our fluency. So audio assisted reading is an individual or group reading activity where students can read along in their books as they hear a fluent reader read on an audio recording, or possibly you. Choral reading would be, as it sounds, like a chorus. So it's all reading in unison. We kind of get away with this, we've gotten away from this a little bit, but it's still a useful thing for a whole class to do, so that they can hear how it happens and practice it in a non-threatening way. Because if the whole class is doing it, they don't necessarily are scared to make mistakes and things if it was just them reading alone. So that choral reading has its time and place as well. So it's not a bad thing to help with that student confidence or that self-confidence and motivation. Paired reading is when students can read aloud to each other or using partners like that. And you can even have a more fluent reader paired with a less fluent reader, or you can have like-minded, or skilled, that's okay too. But then that paired reading can be used with any book, and then they're taking turns reading by sentence or paragraph or page or chapter or whatever it is, depending on the age of your students. And it's really nice because they can possibly give feedback, or again, if you have a very good reader compared to one that needs work on fluency, they will try and mimic that fluency too. If they're practicing, and they can practice even the same, they don't even need to alternate. They could practice reading the same paragraph or something like that too. So that's a good one. Reader's theater, we're going to get to a little bit more, but of course that's a strategy for developing reading fluency as well, which it's reading through parts of scripts, but I'm going to talk about that in the next slide here. And then there's shared reading. It's an interactive reading experience that occurs when students join in or share the reading of a book or other text while guided and supported by you. So this could be in a small group instruction and things like that, or smaller groups or guided reading scenario. That shared reading is very good. And then the timed repeated readings, you can be careful with the timed part of it, but especially if you know that students can handle the timing without having anxiety about the time. If you know that students are having anxiety about the timing of it, then of course you're going to eliminate that part of it. But if you're challenging some of your students out there to be that timing aspect of it, this is a great one that you can do. And it's good for monitoring that student fluency development. So repeated readings under timed conditions of a familiar level of text can increase that student's reading speed and can improve their comprehension as well. So even though if they're reading it over and over again and keep practicing it, that's a fantastic way to improve the fluency of some of even our higher flyers out there. And then, so like getting back to this reader theater, some of us probably do this already, which is it's a great strategy to develop this fluency and so that students can read a part from a script. They don't need to memorize their part. They can read it right off the page, but rereading it several times is a great way to go. Just like the last strategy, practicing over and over again, that same text is not a problem, especially because we are focusing on the fluency aspect at this point. The best readers theater scripts have a lot of dialogue in them. Changing characters as well often is a good one too. How can we do this? Choose a story that can be divided into parts, or you can assign parts to each student. You can ask students to read their part orally for practice, have students read those parts to an audience. You can even get scripts to plays that might work too. And then there is a link here for some scripts that you can possibly use in your classroom for readers theater. It's a great one, and it's fun. It's engaging. Students really get excited about it, especially if it's a fun play that they're working on. And again, it gets to practice them being a character, right? They get to choose a character or change their voice in some way, which is also great practice for fluency. And then the last little bit here is using technology to support this fluency. So reading and recording, especially in small group centers, or if you want to do it in centers, period, using things like, if you have iPads, you can use something like a GarageBand app, or Flipgrid is a fantastic one where students can read to themselves and then they can hear themselves, and they don't necessarily need to watch the video as long as they can hear it, and then re-record and practice, and they can even change their voices. They can pretend they're a cowboy or a princess or whatever it is, or a monster. And you can give them certain challenges so that they can reread the same script, but over and over in different ways. And that really does help that fluency come along. And then, of course, there's the online voice recorder, which is just recording that voice. And it's the same kind of concept that you just want them to be able to record it and then listen to themselves and then try and improve upon it. So reading that same text and doing it over and over again for practice is a fantastic way to do it. And then that's basically how you could leverage technology for this. But there's obviously other ways as well. There's read write, again, has some of that capability as well, but it's more about that the practice and listening to themselves. And especially as a teacher, you can't get to all of your students at the same time. So that's a great way that you can put that there, and then maybe you can watch or listen to their reading at another time. So if you needed to do that. Again, I flew through all of this. I know I was talking quickly, but I know I am cognizant of it is a Monday afternoon and you are quite, been a long day. So I didn't want to keep you too long. I know that we were scheduled for a lot longer, but hopefully you're not too mad at me that we might end up a little bit earlier. But those of you that want to stick around, we are going to stick around for a few minutes here. So if you have any questions or you want to clarify anything or anything like that, you're welcome to put those questions in the chat or please unmute and ask any questions. And we will be here for a few more minutes for sure. And so thank you again for joining us, and reach out to your consultants if you have any questions or you need any support with your comprehension or your fluency or anything else that's ELA mattered. But we appreciate you coming this Monday afternoon, and take care, and hopefully we'll see you again. But please stick around if you do want to listen to questions or if you have any questions. But thank you very much for joining us.